Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Want to welcome back to the program Daniel Nichanian, editor-in-chief and founder of Bolt Magazine. And folks, if you ever need a cheat sheet for really midterm elections, off-year elections, general elections, go to Bolt Magazine, find Daniel on Twitter. Nobody does a more comprehensive overview of these elections than Daniel. Daniel, thanks so much for joining us.
Or
thanks for having me.
On Twitter, right? That's how people can find you.
Yes,
Daniel.
Yes, correct.
Yes.
So, all right, let's start with Ohio. I think last time we spoke to you, it was either in the run-up to or the wake of question, I think it was number one, which was an attempt to sort of undermine this constitutional amendment in Ohio that's coming up in a week from now. Would just remind us of what that was about, and then we can talk about what's happening a week from today.
You know, that's a great place to start, because when I keep mentioning to people that there's an abortion rights referendum on the ballot in Ohio, I keep hearing, wasn't that already taken care of over the summer? And I think there's been some confusion because of how much attention that referendum got. So what actually happened in, throughout 2023, in the aftermath of Dobbs, is that progressive organizers in Ohio wanted to put a ballot measure on the ballot to codify abortion rights. And Republicans tried to speed a change to the entire process of how you pass a referendum in Ohio to undermine the abortion rights referendum. So there was a kind of a prequel in August where Republicans proposed raising the threshold to pass a constitutional amendment at the polls from 50% to 60%, which would obviously make it much more difficult to pass an abortion rights referendum. Also, all sorts of other measures that could be on the ballot in coming years. So that actually, there was a very high turnout in August for a special election in an off year. There was already a remarkable sign of engagement. That ballot measure lost by a big margin because people don't often like to undercut their own power, which is effectively what's being asked of them. So now there is the main event is actually in a week, which is the vote to actually enshrine abortion rights in the state constitution. And
is there a sense of what's going to happen in that election? I mean, I know if what happened over the summer was a leading indicator, it looks pretty good, but there's this confusion. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, so polling indicates that that the issue one, which is the next week's vote, is in the lead. Republicans seem to not have given up the way we've seen them give up in other abortion referendums. I think what's just really important in next week's election is that we've seen a lot of referendums around abortion rights since Dobbs in states that already had abortion legalized. California had an abortion referendum. Vermont had an abortion referendum. Kansas had sort of an abortion referendum, but all those states already had abortion rights. I think what's very important in Ohio, not necessarily the first time, but it's a state with an abortion ban that's probably looming if this falls. People are really stepping in, and they're really going to change the availability of abortion access going forward if this passes. So that's why it's feeling like a big deal. It is a big deal. It's going to affect a ton of people, and Republicans are sort of trying right now to say. The governor, I think, a few days ago said, if you vote against abortion rights next week, we'll soften the ban that we have planned and things like that, sort of convince people it won't be as extreme. But obviously the ban, there's a 6-week ban that's sort of in court right now that's there, and that's really the horizon that Ohio is.
I like the idea of Republicans saying, just trust us on abortion. Just trust us. It won't be as extreme. We won't, which is, I think there's a general understanding in the public that you can't trust what they say on this because even on the federal level, after, Dobbs, Lindsey Graham introduced a federal restriction on abortion, one saying it was left to the states. Putting that aside for a second, though, I'm reminded of how contentious the language of the referendum was and the battle over that. what should voters look out for if they're going to the ballot box, and they should be, in Ohio next week, about what the misleading language could indicate and what they should be checking off if they want to protect abortion rights?
Yeah, so there was a lengthy back and forth between the Secretary of State's office, election officials, and people who supported the referendum on what ballot language was going to be used, because I think it was the Secretary of State's office. Now there's a slight hesitation as to whether they were the ones responsible for the ballot language, but they were writing a version of it that was sort of biased, so using some Republican messaging about the content of the referendum, and proponents of the referendum just want a clear sense that the yes on issue 1 is to protect abortion access. A complicating factor, Emma, that maybe also gets to another form of confusion is that the August referendum was also named issue 1. And there's some signs that Republicans purposefully labeled this new one issue 1 as well, because there were all these signage in August and July from the left saying vote no on issue 1, and now the positions have been inverted. And if you're for abortion rights, you should have voted no in August, and yes now to the same number issue. And obviously that's not great from the perspective of voter education, public information. So people should maybe make sure that they are that they're voting on based on how this coming issue 1 is, and not based on how the one in August was.
So it's yes if you want to protect it.
If you favor abortion access, yes. If you want to keep the status quo and not have abortion in the Constitution, that's no. So that's
understood.
That's the current situation.
Okay.
Yeah.
We should also say that legal marijuana is on the ballot, I think, as well, right? In a week. And I want you to talk about that, but the decision by activists to have these ballot measures this year, as opposed to 2024, what have you done any reporting around that? Because it seems to me it would behoove both those people who want to support abortion and legal weed to have done it in 2024, or maybe not, but it certainly would have helped, I guess, like, Sherrod Brown, maybe, to have those on the ballot next year.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's no question that since Dobbs, Republicans have been put on the defensive on the issue of abortion, and that this, especially in a state like Ohio that has leaned right in recent years, and where Senator Brown is going to be in a difficult spot next year, this is an issue they're gonna try and campaign on. I mean, I think maybe the issue of weed is a bit different on the issue of abortion. We've already seen stories of kids in Ohio having been blocked from access to abortion in 2022. And I think also importantly, we've seen how Republicans have tried to game the referendum process in the spring of 2023. They sort of rushed that referendum. That's all they could have done. We're seeing so many bills around the country trying to make it more hard to do initiatives. Now we're seeing, that we could have a whole call where I just list all the states where we've seen bills in just recent years that have done that. So I think there's kind of a clock ticking for any efforts by progressives to put these important issues on the ballot. And I think abortion access, given the stakes, is sort of like, I mean, clearly everyone, both for getting it done eventually and just the lives of people affected, I think getting it done the quicker possible was the priority. I don't. Weed, I think, is a different consideration, because not that it's not urgent for some people, but maybe a different sort of urgency. Interestingly, there's another initiative already on the horizon, Sam, in Ohio, which people I think would be interested about. It's independent. An independent commission for drawing state lines, I think, or voting rights groups there have already started to work on that to try and put it potentially in 2024 ballot. That's something that also will matter a lot in Ohio, given how the state lines are drawn there to be very, very friendly to the GOP.
So, and is there early voting in Ohio? In other words, can people be voting right now?
Yes, there is early voting in Ohio. Early indications show that there's a lot of people voting. For now, it's sort of hard to compare to the last equivalent election, because it's rare to have such an important election on an odd year ballot. But it does indicate for now we're seeing similar headlines as we saw in August, which is that people are voting.
Great. All right, let's move to Pennsylvania. I just read that $17 million at least has been spent on the high court, on the Pennsylvania Supreme Court election, which is pretty extraordinary, it seems to me. And I have a feeling that they'll probably be even spending more, a couple million more by this week. What's at stake in Pennsylvania?
Yeah, so there's a Supreme Court election in Pennsylvania. As you said, it's the second of the year only. The first one was in Wisconsin, and I think a lot of people were following that. There's a way in which Wisconsin always attracts more attention on judicial races, but Pennsylvania, for very obvious reasons, anyone should care about Pennsylvania, just if you care about politics federally and nationally. It's a major swing state. One thing that may have blunted the buzz around it up until recently is that the Democrats are sure to keep a majority right now, no matter the result of this election, because the Chief Justice, who's a Democrat, died last year. This is going to fill the Chief Justice's seat. So it's going to be either 5-2 Democratic or 4-3 Democratic, depending on the result. But that doesn't mean that it's not a very, very important election. First, because it could set up, if Republicans gain the seat, it could set up them gaining the seat in a couple of years, which would have very big implications for voting rights and redistricting, especially because this court has been very important for redistricting and helped Democrats gain the U.S. House in 2017 when it struck down a GOP gerrymander. But also, even in the meantime, voting rights in election cases haven't always fallen on party line in Pennsylvania. For instance, there was a ballot, an important ruling a year ago that Democratic side lost that tossed out a lot of mailed ballots during the midterm. So in 2024, we're going to see a lot of lawsuits in Pennsylvania around the election. Unfortunately, that feels like a certainty. It could be of the variety of the more routine variety of whether mail ballots are counted and sorted. But also, if Trump is on the ballot after the election, we know what he tried to do in 2020 and what he could try to do again in 2024. So these seats on the court are just very, very important and attracting a lot of attention. And
there are other races in Pennsylvania that you've been watching too, particularly on the policing side.
Yeah, there's a lot happening in Pennsylvania. I mean, just maybe to stay on the election for a second, which I think a lot of people don't know, that county commissioners in Pennsylvania have immense amount of authority and discretion over how to run elections, whether to have ballot drop boxes, whether to put sheriff's deputies in front of every mail in the drop box, which is done in a few places, which obviously raises questions of civil rights, whether to allow people to fix mistakes on ballot. And I was talking to the head of Common Cause Pennsylvania, a voting rights group, and he estimates that tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of ballots, mail ballots, are really at stake here in these procedures. And I a lot of people in 11 months I know will be very stressed about who's going to win the election and what's happening at the county level and all of these rules, and there's going to be a lot of agitation. But it's important to know this is really the next 7 days are really where that's at play in all of these big Pennsylvania counties. A lot of them tipped Democratic in the last time there were these elections in 2019, especially in the suburbs, and that really helped Democrats sort of shield themselves from Trump and his lawsuits and his efforts to game the system in 2020. And now those suburban counties like Bucks County and other places are again putting their county commissions and their board of elections at stake. There's also there's even a fake Trump elector who's running for county commission in the Pittsburgh region.
And this is a big deal because Pennsylvania in 2020 was decided by was it 60,000 votes, and maybe less in 2016. That's out of like something like 6-7 million voters. So this is a couple of thousand votes here, a couple of thousand votes there make a huge difference in terms of like whose ballots are counted.
Oh, absolutely. There's no question that we're literally going to hear about I think there's going to, it's sort of, in a year, we're going to hear people wish they had known about, I think, this week's election this week. And then it's going to be late because people are going to be in office. And this kind of, people in Pennsylvania are more concerned even than what I said, because to go back to our previous discussion, the state Supreme Court has issued some rulings since 2020 that have made it a bit harder to get your mail ballot counted and made it a little more likely that they'll be tossed, as I was describing earlier. So that actually has increased the importance of whether county officials allow you, for instance, to cure your ballot, to fix your ballot. If you forget to put the date on the back of the envelope, even if you've sent it in time, even if it's arrived in time, technically the state has to reject that ballot unless you go and reject it. That seems like potentially a small thing, but we'll be talking about a lot of ballots. And in a tight election, that's the kind of stuff that is very important.
We should also say, we're getting, I am living in Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania, and the school board elections are pretty big there too. Particularly with all the Moms for Liberty candidates. I mean, this has been a big push for them to take over these school boards as a way, I guess, of banning books of various ilk, and also, just sort of impose some type of like anti-trans agenda in all these places.
Yeah, and it already comes together. All the things we're talking about. I mentioned Bucks County, for instance, which is a very, very large county in the suburbs of Philly. That's really been the one of the key centers of a school board race there. Actually, Moms for Liberty has already made a lot of progress on the school boards there. There's a few. There've been very negative campaigning there. A Republican operative sent sexually explicit mailers to the household of Republicans to like kind of supposedly show the kind of books that are in schools. That's the kind of thing we're seeing there. That's the same county that was talking about the county, as the county commission and election rules. That's the same county where the Republican head of the county is a fake Trump elector from 2020 and remains the head of the party. So all of these different issues in terms of what conservatives are sort of eager to change are all connected.
All right, let's move from Pennsylvania. You had a thread, I mean, it's a general thread, but I thought it was a pretty important one to remind people of, in terms of, and particularly at a time where the Supreme Court is pretty iffy on the Voting Rights Act. And it was about Mississippi and the disenfranchisement of folks who have been convicted of a crime and served time in prison. Walk us through this dynamic and what states are really, this is becoming this is or continues to be a big issue.
Yeah, no, it's super important. I think, at Bolts, we cover elections and what's at stake, what's on the ballot, what people can influence. I think we always try and keep in mind the conditions on which they're voting and how many people are excluded. And our reporter, Alex Burness, wrote effectively a few stories this fall and summer about the people who are left out of the process this fall, because, we could always run stories like that in the sense that there's people excluded from the process in almost every state when it comes to criminal convictions. But the states that are specifically voting this fall have the most restrictive, the harshest, the most punitive laws in the nation, pretty much. And I think you're referencing to, I'm thinking about Mississippi, Virginia now, and Kentucky. Mississippi, according to national estimates, has the highest rate of people who can't vote because of a past criminal conviction. And I mean, the estimate is that 11% of adults in Mississippi are barred from voting because of a past criminal conviction, and because Mississippi bars people who are convicted of some felonies for life. So, my colleague Alex talked to someone who served 1 year in prison for theft about 20 years ago, and was released 20 years ago, and still has not been able to vote. So that's sort of just the scope of the situation is so huge that it really kind of makes a mockery of the rest of what's going on. I think what the thread was also calling attention to the racism that this is tied to. Originally, Mississippi's system was designed when they drew a state constitution in 1890, and with the very explicit goal in 1890, it was a bunch of white supremacists came together with the goal of finding ways to not allow Black people to vote in Mississippi. And they actually made a list of offenses in 1890 that they thought Black people would be more likely to be convicted of. And those are the ones that people lost the right for life and to vote to life, and everything else was not disqualifying. So that has been modified to some extent over the years, but the basic racism of the criminal legal system still gets imported in the voting rights arena. So right now, 16% of Black adults cannot vote in Mississippi, which is obviously a staggering rate. And just maybe a quick note, I mentioned Virginia, which I think has this reputation of being more being more democratic than these other states. But the Republican governor there this year ended the policy of automatically restoring the voting rights of people who finish a sentence or who leave prison. So at this moment in Virginia, we're back to a system of losing your right to vote for life for any felony conviction, which is extraordinarily rare by national standards. And the fact that that's happening in Virginia under someone who's tried to build a centrist Republican reputation, I think is very important.
And I think it was McAuliffe had reversed that years ago, and then it's been reinstituted by Youngkin. We should just say, I just want to put a finer point on that Mississippi thing, because this is something that we saw in many states in the the former Confederate slave-owning states in the wake of the 15th Amendment, which gave the vote, and you could no longer gave the vote to freed slaves, and you could no longer bar someone from voting based upon race. The name of the game in the wake of Reconstruction was for these states to sort of create a mechanism to as efficiently as possible disenfranchise as many Black people, Black men, as possible at that time. And you saw a Supreme Court not terribly dissimilar in disposition to the one that we have now, basically waving that stuff through. And that was sort of law of the land for 70, 75 years until the Voting Rights Act. And now we're sort of, have been rolling that back. But people should understand that's the way it was done. And there was an understanding, I think, at that time, we can't do this, as efficiently as saying we're not going to allow Black people to vote. Because we're not allowed to do that because of the federal Constitution. But if we can come up with a mechanism where if we disenfranchise poor white people, that's okay. But as long as we end up disenfranchising more Black men than white men, we're good. We've picked up some votes. And that's been the strategy for 30, 40 years, essentially, for a lot of these states.
Yeah, I mean, to give you just a sense again of scope in Mississippi, the vast majority of people who have lost the right to vote for life in Mississippi are Black. Even though black people represent about 40% or less of the Mississippi population, so that's really the effect now. What's super interesting is that in August there was a surprise decision by a federal court that struck down Mississippi's system of barring people to vote for life, and there was this small moment where it looked like things might be changing. And then the full Fifth Circuit of Appeals stepped in, vacated the ruling, and we're back to where we were now. And it's a very long status quo that dates back to this the 19th century we're discussing. But it's interesting that if you're in Mississippi, cannot vote. The person I was describing earlier who lost the right to vote because of a theft conviction 20 years ago. If you're in their shoes, right, there was this brief moment, this brief glimmer of hope that the doors of the franchise have been opened, that has been taken away. So it's just. It is this very long history, but this constant wave of attacks on the right to vote of people on the ground.
walk us through just some of the key states where the legislature or the power may sway or be locked in. I have a piece that you wrote from early October talking about Louisiana. That door seems to have, been shut now.
Correct.
Because the governor, a Republican governor, was elected. Now you have the trifecta, as you were, and even though there's going to be an election for the state houses in next week, they're all but over because of lack of candidates, really.
Yeah. So interestingly, the states that are electing the state government I just mentioned, because they're the states with these particularly hostile voting laws. So Kentucky, Virginia, Mississippi, as well as New Jersey are the 4 states that are going to be electing their state governments next week. So their governor and or their state house members and state senate members. So the 5th state, Louisiana, has been taken care of, as you were saying. The governorship flipped to Republicans, who therefore gained control of the state government for the first time in 8 years. Interestingly, Democrats had already lost for the state house and state senate before a single vote was cast, because they had Republicans who were running unopposed in the majority of districts in both the state house and the state senate. So Republicans had already won the legislature before a single vote was counted, and then they gained the governorship. In the 4 other states I mentioned, the big one everyone's, I think, watching is Virginia. Virginia, which again doesn't have the reputation of being particularly red anymore, but Republicans are very close to winning control of the state government. They just need to pick up a few seats in the state senate. And Republicans have been very explicit that this is going to have big consequences, including on abortion access, if they gain the trifecta in Virginia. So what the Democrats are trying to do there is prevent a Republican trifecta. Sort of the same in Kentucky, where a Democratic governor is seeking a second term. If he loses, it would hand full control of the state government to Republicans. That's kind of their third gain opportunity. Just a level under in importance, just because Republicans already have a veto-proof majority in Kentucky, and the governor, while has powers, is not quite as decisive perhaps for policy. And then Mississippi and New Jersey, interesting states. One is currently all Republican, one is all Democratic, and each party is trying to keep it. Democrats are surprisingly trying to make a big push to gain the governorship in Mississippi. The governor is sort of engulfed in a scandal there, even if the state is Republican. So that's interesting to watch, but that's also why all of the stuff we were saying earlier about who's allowed to vote and not allowed to vote is very important.
This will be the first real election since 2022. I mean, we've had special elections, and Democrats have done quite well in them. But this is going to be the first one that's going to give us a sense of like purple states and how much things like abortion are playing. And we're going to get a wide array of understanding of where the electorate is, or at least a greater one than we've had since 2022.
Yeah, I think just for the pure question of how things are looking for 2024, I think I would invite people to follow what's happening in Virginia and in Pennsylvania. I mean, Virginia is the clear sense of Democrats running versus Republicans in a way that's nationally recognizable, and the comparison point to the 2020, 2022 elections and whether things have shifted will be interesting. I think especially because Republicans are surprisingly really running on abortion in Virginia. Like we've seen in 2022 or since then, Republicans try to shy away from their position on restricting abortions. I think we were saying that earlier when we were talking about Ohio, but in Virginia they've been pretty explicit again that there will be restrictions on abortion if they win. They've tried to turn the table and make the Democrats look extreme on the issue. That's something we did see in other states last year. It didn't work for Republicans then. So I think that's making a lot of people look at Virginia. And Pennsylvania too. The state Supreme Court race is a statewide election in potentially the biggest swing state in the country. You can't get a better dress rehearsal than that for the 2024 election.
Daniel Nichanian, editor-in-chief, founder of Bolts Magazine. Thanks so much for your time today. We'll put a link to Bolts Magazine and your cheat sheet for next week.
Awesome. It's always fun to talk.
All right. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
coming on.